Welcome to TennCom. My name is Beckett and today we're looking at the Yonex VCORE Pro 97D. I think this is one of the best looking rackets you can buy right now, and that alone to me makes it worth the whatever $300 MSRP. We're looking at 320 grams, a tight 18 by 20 string pattern, and a pretty thin beam at 21 millimeters. That is one of the things they did change from last year. It used to be a 20 millimeter beam, now we're to a 21. A problem I did have with the old versions was there was so much flex. I felt like that thin beam just twisted way too much on impact, especially if you're the type of player who impacts the ball higher up in the hoop. It was a little bit unstable up there. So the thicker beam is welcome, but I was happy to see that they kept that RA really low. So the stiffness still at 60, nice and low. Because the beam is thicker but the stiffness is the same, that means the actual layup of graphite is quite a bit softer, and you do still feel a great ball pocketing sensation with these rackets. So with the updates out of the way, I want to go into this new scoring system that I've worked really hard on developing. So it's a three-dimensional system with three different axes that do a better job of describing the relationship between the physical attributes of the racket and some feelings you might be experiencing on court. We hear all the time racket brands say they're increasing power and control, but that doesn't make a lot of sense because a lot of the time in tennis we feel like power and control are opposing forces, so I wanted to account for that in my reviews. I will post an article down below on our website where I go much more in depth about how I developed this system and a little bit what I'm thinking about while I rate these rackets. So the first one I want to talk about is the potential energy of the racket. So when you think baseline physics, when you hit an object with another object, the heavier that object is, the more potential you have to hit that object harder. So the heavier rackets are going to have higher potential energies. We're also going to look at swing weight. Rackets with higher swing weight have higher potential energies. Potential energy is not just power though, it's also spin. So the more force you can put on the ball at impact can be kind of translated into power, ball speed, depth in the court, but also spin, RPMs on the ball. Another thing that we're thinking about is the stiffness. So stiffer rackets are going to impart more spin and also more power, easier access to depth. With the VCORE 97D, we've got two things in our favor. It's pretty heavy, 320 grams, but the swing weight's decently high, about 330 strung according to our measurements. On the other hand, it's really soft, so you're not getting the most potential energy possible, but you're getting a fair amount. When I was playing big hitters, I found it really easy to redirect their pace back deep into the court. I could get great power while I was accelerating through approach shots and decent spin, especially for such a tight 18-20 pattern and such a thin, soft beamed racket. The combination of a thin beam and a tight pattern really hurts spin potential, but there's so much potential energy behind the mass of the actual racket. I could get that top spin that I needed to keep the ball in on most shots. So I'm going to score this one at 129. For reference, some similar scoring rackets are the Head Radical Pro at 125, the Yonex E-Zone Tour at 128, and quite a bit higher up we have the Pro Staff 97 Autograph at 140. Remember, this is subjective. I completely made this up, so whether you want to trust my opinion about how this feels is up to you. I would trust me because I'm the smartest person I know. The next thing we've got is Stringbed Performance. We have higher launch angles and lower launch angles. This one with the tight 18 by 20 pattern is going to be a much lower launch angle. Relatively consistent feeling, but also a little bit unforgiving. So it's consistent because you can smoke the ball and have so much confidence because the launch angle off the 97D is quite low. I never worried about spraying the ball long. The ball always went exactly where I thought it was going to go, so long as I kept my swing speed up and stepped into the ball without being scared. So that's where the consistency comes in. Where it felt unforgiving for me was when I'm back deep, when I don't have that energy to put a lot of force into the ball because I'm running for a passing shot or I'm getting pushed back by a bigger hitter. That's where sometimes my swing speed slows down and I need that forgiveness from a more open pattern racket. So when you have a lower launch angle, it's harder to get depth into the court. This hurts on defense a lot. It's also hard to get height over the net. So the height buys you a lot of time in the court. If you're going with the VCORE 97D, it's probably going to suit you best to keep on offense. However, if you like to use slice for defense, that's a bit of a different story. 1820 is awesome for slice. So Stringbed Performance here is going to be relatively low. I'm rating it at a 78. Some similar competitors are the Head Prestige MP. This is the old all red version. It's now called the Prestige Pro. That's at 80. The Wilson Pro Staff 97, just the normal weight, 92, and then we have the Blade 98 16x19 version 8, so the new one, that would be at 94. Next thing I want to talk about is the weight distribution of this racket. So there's different ways that you can put the weight on the racket. You can kind of gear these rackets more towards power, also towards stability, but maybe more toward maneuverability. So I want to talk about how it feels that Yonex has distributed the weight so you can get an idea of how it might feel on court. Definitely a hefty boy, this one. There's a lot of weight around the head, but it does feel like there's a lot of weight in the handle too because it's so stable on volleys and slices. To me, that suggests that the weight is pretty polarized, so the weight is pushed towards the tips of the racket. Lots of weight in the handle, that is recoil weight that really helps on volleys and backhand slices, especially for me. But also good weight in the tip. So this is great for ground strokes when you're baseline bashing. You need a lot of power just from raw mass. That's where that came in as well. But it also felt like there's a ton of weight at 3 and 9. Like I said before, with the thinner beam racket, sometimes it feels like there's a lot of flexing with the softer rackets. The way that you could counteract the flexing from the soft layup of graphite is by putting weight at 3 and 9. So when you hit the ball a little bit off center, you've got that weight there to support the ball and stop the racket from twisting on contact. One thing it kind of lacks is maneuverability. We have weight kind of plastered all over this racket, so it's not going to be the most maneuverable racket. That said, the thinner beam means feels like there's a little bit less drag, so it's not like super sluggish. I found rackets like the Babolat Pure Strike Tour to feel a lot more sluggish and kind of clubby through the air. Same with the RF97 Autograph. It could feel kind of clubby at times, but we're talking about an extra 20 grams of weight in that racket. To give you some comparison, I scored the weight distribution at about 132. So the higher the number, the more geared towards kind of like baseline stability and plow through, whereas a lower number would mean much more geared towards maneuverability and recoil weight, so stability, a more headlight type racket. So this one is at a 132. Similar rackets I scored with the old Extreme Pro, so the Graphene 360, the neon yellow one, 130. The E-Zone Tour, about 135, so a bit heftier feeling. And lastly, the Gravity Pro 137, even more hefty feeling than the VCORE 97 HD. This racket really is a terrible choice for a lot of players. It's going to be hard for most people to find a good competition use for this thing because that tight string pattern and that thin beam is really not as relevant as it used to be. That said, it is amazing to hit with. I loved playing with this thing, and if you're the kind of player who needs that low launch angle, tons of control because you need to force yourself to step into every ball and swing big, this is an awesome place to go. My close friend and regular hitting partner actually switched to this racket because when he tightens up, he starts falling back and moonballing it. So this racket forces him to swing big, and he's a spin player, so you never know what's going to work for you.